Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we have a very special guest on the channel, Mr. Thomas Lebamoff. Mr. Lebamoff is the founder, chief executive officer, and managing partner of Exactus Advisors. They are a Chicago-based advisory and consulting firm. As a businessman and an investor, Mr. Lebamoff has also founded and managed various different businesses over the years, and he is also the current treasurer of the Macedonian Patriarch Organization. Mr. Lebamoff, welcome to Samuel's Fortress. How are you today?
Thank you, Kirill. Very happy to be here. I've followed you for quite a while, and just love the content and your practical, logical positions on communicating a complex area of the world.
No, I appreciate that very much, and I do want to thank you for accepting the invitation to come on the channel. It's definitely a pleasure to speak with you today. I mentioned you were, a businessman, investor, involved in all that kind of stuff. I did see on some of the information you sent me that you were also, at one point in time, a president of a gold mine. Is that correct?
Yeah, my brother runs the operations. We have about 100 acres. Placer mining, where we're leasing the land from the Bureau of Land Management and Forestry in Arizona, in the Bradshaw Mountains. So it's part, we're at that point where it's more than a hobby because there's been investments, but you're just fighting Mother Nature. It's in a very interesting area, very remote, very difficult to get to. And you have rattlesnake season in September. You have droughts. You need water. So we typically are fighting Mother Nature, for sure.
Oh, that's very interesting. So for those of you who are not aware of you and your family, I mean, you're a Macedonian and a Bulgarian. I guess we'll get into some of the nuances there. But you grew up here. Your family's been here in the United States for quite some time. Is that correct?
Yeah, my grandfather on my dad's side, Argir, he came in 1907 as a 16-year-old boy through Ellis Island, and Lebamovi, right? Our name ends with OFF. Not sure how that happened, but through Ellis Island, they probably a lot of Germans influence, and maybe they wanted to put the OF on versus the OV.
Yeah.
But we've been here for very long time. My other grandfather on my mother's side, he was denied twice through Ellis Island for whatever reason, and
they sent him back all the way to Macedonia.
Yeah, they sent him all the way back, right? And it really, I mean, it's heartbreaking. His brother went to Australia, but he tried a third time. He saved his money and got a more of like a first class passage, so he wasn't down in the lower balls of the ship. And somehow I think that might have helped, but he got through the third time. That was in I think the 20s, late 20s, I believe. I'll have to double check that, but he kind of came from a different point in time during the Civil War, and interesting stories on his side because he had to go through Greece and so.
Yeah. Well, at least on your father's side, I'm aware of some of the interesting stories. I have a book here, An American Macedonian, an autobiography by George Lebamoff, who is your father. And it's interesting. Dragomir Bogdanov of MPO Pirin, the Chicago chapter of the Macedonian Patriarch Organization, gave me this book a couple of years ago. And I read it at the time, but then, when we set up this interview, I reread it. And definitely a fascinating history your family has. It's seems to me that the majority of your family comes from based on what I read, from the Aegean region of Macedonia, modern day Greece. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. My dad's family came from a village called Vishny right outside of Kostor.
Okay.
And my baba came from a village kind of next to that called Blatza. And both are still in existence. We visited them. And then my mother's side came from both Vishny and Baptur. And
Okay.
so they were all in the same region. And
Sure.
I think my mom and dad are like fourth or fifth cousins,
Okay.
because we've done the DNA testing
Sure.
and it
I'm
comes
sure
back.
everyone is when you kind of, if you look
No,
at it. Yeah.
it is. That's what's kind of interesting to me. And I think you go further out, I think we find out when, forget about borders, right? We're
Right.
all the same people,
Right.
just, positioned by politics and governments. And, that's kind of the course of history.
Um, and when I was reading your father's autobiography here, it seems like your family had some interesting connections to the Ilinden uprising. Can you give us a little bit more information about, who those family members were, how they were involved uh, in the uprising itself?
Yeah, so on my mother's side, Tipo Sulaf was a voivode of that area, and he actually was killed doing the research. He was killed during the Linden, but it was the year before.
Okay.
There was obviously many skirmishes and
Sure.
things that were happening, but he was killed prior to that. And during that day, the Turks came into Vishny, the village, because Tipo was part of Vishny
Mm-hmm.
on that part of my mom's side. But my Dedo was, essentially his mother was shot and killed, kind of in the street right by the city fountain, and or the area where probably
Sure.
everybody's getting their water in the well, and his it would be my, I guess, Stadadetto was off in Constantinople at the time, causing havoc over there with my Detto's brother. And
Okay.
so they ended up got arrested. I'm not sure if my Stadadetto did, but my great uncle or whatever, he was arrested and somehow they got out. But causing all kinds of challenges, right? I guess
Sure.
that was the thing, right? When, our people were just, you can only put up with so much, and eventually you
Right.
rise up. And it was a tragic day, but I go back, I get goosebumps now, right? Just thinking about it. And it's not that far back, right? And
No.
I visited, Greece or Aegean Macedonia, and saw, all of the homes, some not there. They still know the Lebamoff name. So I've probably been there 3 or 4 times
Okay.
in the past, but we all of us, right? Everybody, we come from proud people. I
Right.
think we are, fighters at heart, and love of family. I mean, that's what, love of food. That's what really unites, I think, all of us. Once we get into politics, then it becomes, a different situation, unfortunately.
Sure. And unfortunately, I think politics and kind of the modern squabbles as far as the ethnic identities are concerned are in some ways unavoidable. So let me just ask you kind of straightforward. I mean, what did your grandparents, great grandparents from that region kind of consider themselves to be in an ethnic sense? Because I know that's always a question as far as that period of time. Do people think of themselves as, ethnic Macedonians, ethnic Bulgarians? How do they view themselves, and how do you view yourself in an ethnic sense?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm an American first, right?
Sure.
That's
Me too.
most obviously. But so, nationality, I'm American, but when I think of my ethnicity, I'm Macedonian, right? But I use the word Macedonian as the region, right?
Right.
There's people from Macedonia in the Pirin, Vardar, and Aegean. And whether you are Albanian living there, or you're a Vlach or a Greek or a Turk, or you still could be considered a Macedonian by
Sure.
geography. So that's kind of how I view it. My grandfather on my dad's side was very much, you know, Tommy, you're Bulgar Macedonian, right? You're Bulgarian.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he would talk about just his grandfather, his father saying the same thing to him, right?
Sure.
Remember, you're Bulgarian. And so, you know, but then on my mother's side, my dedo there was just, he's Macedonian, right? And he kind of, you know, so my grandfather came in 1907 in very different times. My other grandfather, I know he got married in 35. He may have came late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
Things were vastly different over
Sure.
there, right? And so I think the identity of just being a Macedonian, because there were no Bulgarian schools anymore, no churches. I mean, it was kind of pushed out.
Right.
And so it was just easier to say Macedonian. And so it's kind of interesting to, I think even back in those days, there was just a simpler approach, even growing up. I'm Macedonian. That, you know, what's your ethnicity? Macedonian. Because it was easier. But then when you dug in, especially if you're talking to somebody who knows, what, I'm actually Bulgarian.
Right.
Right. And so it since it's so complicated, you know, my family came from Aegean Macedonian. And so we're Bulgarians with really out of country, because the current Bulgaria today is not my country, although we align to it. So that's kind of simple right there. That's it.
Yeah, when I was reading your father's book here, I mean, his autobiography. I mean, it seems like he kind of used the terms Macedonian, Bulgarian almost interchangeably. They kind of meant similar things to him. And I mean, for myself, the same way. I mean, I always refer to myself as a Macedonian, but you know, if you start digging in, okay, what does that mean? I mean, obviously the Bulgarian stuff has roots and is definitely incorporated into that identity, I would say. At least for me personally, it seems like that's kind of how you view it as well.
Yeah. And, you know, I think the language that, you know, it's interesting, right? Because even the current High Bulgarian today and the current Macedonian language that's spoke, you know, in Vardar, my mom, it's funny, my mom, it's hard for her to, well, one, she really doesn't understand the Bulgarian language. My dad either, to that degree.
Mm-hmm.
There's words, right, that you pick up. But it's that old Bulgarian dialect that they spoke. You know, I would call it, you know, Hanyak hillbilly language, right? You know, there's probably 200 words or something like that, that, you know, you pretty much would converse. But when they came over to America, you know, there were no words for street, for car,
right,
for building. So all of a sudden it was like, you know, get out of the streeto, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right. Get the cotto, get in a cotto, right?
Yeah.
So we're making up words. So half the words probably that I grew up with hearing were Americanized.
Sure.
Like, so, you know, but anyway, it's interesting. I wish that I could speak it. My parents spoke only, basically to kind of not, wouldn't have private conversations. They just didn't want us to understand. So they switched to Macedonian, right? And we would just call it Macedonian. We didn't specify it's Macedonian or it's Bulgarian. It was just Macedonian. It was easier. Okay. And so, but you know, my grandmother died early before I was even born. So I think if she would have been alive, I think we would have had that instilled of, you know, making sure that we could both, you know, speak the language. And so that, you know, it was just a different time. Everybody pushed to become an American and to speak English. My grandmother, or Baba, she never really went out of the house because she didn't speak English, because she was embarrassed. Right. She didn't want to go out of the house because she didn't know that language. And, you know, when you think about as we started to get through World War I and World War II, and the influences of what Bulgaria was doing and how Yugoslavia, everybody was very sensitive to, hey, we are not communists, we're not socialists, we are Americans.
Right.
And so that was a interesting dynamics growing up, that the patriotic aspect of being American was huge. So
yeah, and I mean, I know obviously the organization is called the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, but if you kind of look at the history, a lot of the writing, the pictures, I mean, they definitely had a strong American patriotism in addition to being, the Macedonian Patriotic Organization. They're also, strong American patriots. So definitely I could see that. Now, how do you understand any Macedonian or Bulgarian at all at this point, or
a little bit
okay.
here, like, the Sedni Tuka,
Yeah.
I mean, Baba would say, so you pick up words, and of course, some of the bad words are the
Sure.
obviously ones that you learn.
Right.
So, well, for sure, I know the dialect. Like I know if someone is speaking the language, in a grocery store around here,
Mhm.
or because occasionally that happens, I know exactly that's our language.
Right.
So do I know exactly what's being said? No, not exactly, but you can pick up on a few words.
Sure.
And so that's it's one of those things, but it sure would be nice because you can converse a lot easier with, our brothers and sisters overseas.
All right. So when your family did come to the United States in the early 20th century, did they come to kind of the Fort Wayne area initially, or how did your family ultimately end up in Indiana?
Yeah, so on my dad's side, his brother was waiting for him in the Philadelphia, outside Pittsburgh, I think. I guess there was I found a earlier address that they ended up sold ice cream, and they lived with several other Macedonian Bulgarians at the time. And my dad was telling me how it kind of went down would be that one or two men would stay back while the others all worked, or they had different shifts. And so, I mean, they were all about, the cooking, making sure everything, in the apartment, or not sure exactly what it was, but we do have an address. It's still there.
Okay.
So I have a lot of that in the genealogy research that I, did early on to, find the ship's passengers and all of that, who the nearest relative was. A lot of details out in Ellis Island, but they were in, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and kind of went back and forth, but eventually they went to Fort Wayne. A lot of Macedonians, coming over, ended up there because it was big in the railroad at that time. And so there's a lot of railroad jobs, a lot of manufacturing in that Fort Wayne area. And as you can imagine, right, we're village people. So the moment a few people, it starts.
Sure.
And, collection, there were people in St. Louis, in, Northwest Indiana, right, Chicago. But Fort Wayne really and Indianapolis had a really strong finding. And, then eventually a church was built, and the MPO was started, back in the 20s.
And I was going to ask you about that. It seems like your family was involved with the founding of that organization. I don't know if it was your grandfather who was.
Yep.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about how he got around to founding that organization. It's been, I mean, I think it was just the 100th anniversary last month in September. So definitely a historic organization. How did your family get involved in that whole process?
I really, I don't know. Like, even in my dad's memoirs, we never really came up like, how did it really happen? I just think really the passion, right? And obviously you kind of have to go back to IMRO and what Ivan Mihailov ordered. And, there were two individuals. I have to go back to,
Sure.
my
No worries.
document. two individuals that came over to kind of more or less be the agents for IMRO in the US, right? And the belief then was that we need to have a political organization, which that was the original name of the MPO, the Macedonian Political Organization,
Right.
because they felt, or Vancho felt that we could lobby or leverage or be involved in Washington politics, and an arm of IMRO over here for funding and everything else. So I mean, it's a very progressive, bold move, I think. And so part of that, it was probably easy to pull people in by by the strongest roots. And I'm sure somehow, they went to Fort Wayne because there was just very, strong strong in numbers of the Macedonians, right? That were really patriotic and were passionate about trying to get their homeland back.
All right. And I think that's maybe one thing a lot of people don't realize about the MPO is that it essentially is an offshoot of the IMRO, especially, after the organization kind of ended back in, 34. I mean, the MPO is really the only other kind of last man standing as far as that organization is concerned. I mean, once the IMRO kind of got shut down in Peting, really it was kind of the MPO that kind of carried the torch, if you will, for that legacy. And I think that's why the MPO has such a rich and profound history, is that it's essentially the continuation of that organization. Now, you did mention Ivan Mikhailov. I know you have a very interesting story about how you met him. I found that very fascinating. Can you give us a little bit of a history about how that occurred?
Yeah, I'm gonna, if you can, let me kind of maybe go back a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what we'll have is we'll have some tentacles that you want to kind of come back to. But there was, so when my uncle Ivan Lebamoff was the president. My dad actually was the treasurer of the MPO, and Ivan was the editor prior to that, and so forth. But there was a lot of conversations around, okay, there's been funds obviously being sent overseas on a regular basis prior to Ivan becoming president and his 2 terms, and essentially you're funding the leader of IMRO, and everyone respected and loved him, and probably feared him as well. Sure. This was his organization, so money was being sent over in support, and individuals were going back and forth, meeting with him or
to Rome.
Through his agents. Peter Otzef was my godfather for Johnny, Andy, all the kids. And, Peter was actually best friends with Vancho. And so there definitely was private correspondence, things going on as well. He was in Fort Wayne. That was probably another reason why Fort Wayne kind of was that, target or the seed for the MPO. Sure. And so, but there was a lot of conversation, and, we were not for profit status, and we're sending money over, and how I guess, how does that perceived, right? We're Americans, right? We're American organization. So there was a lot going on, right? Post World War II. And so, I think there was, I would say, disagreements, right, between should we stop or not. And I know my dad was kind of on one side and Ivan was on the other. So kind of, I think there was probably maybe a mutual understanding that the MPO just stopped sending money. That was Ivan's decision. Okay. But my dad continued to, I think took 3 or 4 trips out there over the course of several years, as also wire. He was wiring his money, right? And, fortunate enough that he was successful in business and he had it and he felt passionate about it. Whether or not he was pulling donations or things from other people and then assembling it and getting it to Yvonne, that kind of led up to my dad having making several trips to Rome.
Okay.
Through agent, to eventually get him. I think they met at a mutual place, but when I was there, so this probably was my dad's third time meeting him, and obviously met Vita and so forth. But we went to his apartment on I think Ponce, someplace in Rome, and we had more or less his bodyguard. It might have been Vita's brother or something, or but my dad brought me and Johnny because that trip was not just about Rome. We went into Bulgaria. We crossed the border into Macedonia. We were in Aegean Macedonia. So, that was kind of the normal trip for my father. And so,
how old were you at this time when you met him during this trip?
I was, this would have been, for me, I was in 89. So it was about a year before he died. So I have all these, the pictures from Walgreens and all these different tapes that we have from Europe, Greece, 1989. My mom's writing Europe, Greece, 89. It was my wife, my mom and dad, Johnny, me. This is a different format. So I'm going to convert all these basically.
Oh, okay.
And because I was just home for the convention.
Sure.
And but basically, because I know we have a picture of us with Vancho. I had my recording at the time because I was just married. My parents bought, one of those little DVX recorders. And I remember, because it had the little red light on, I was just kind of holding it, kind of down, right? Because they don't even know what that thing is, a camera, or something.
Right.
And so we were recording some of the conversation. And so we're just trying to get that, because I think people would probably like to see it, right? And anything
Absolutely.
around Vancho, I think, for sure. And so when we met him, my brother, my wife, and there was someone else with us that was more like Ivan's bodyguard. And I just don't know if it was Vita's brother or it was somebody. And I'll have to ask Johnny if he remembers who that was. But we were out on I guess the porch outside the kitchen. Everybody smoked. Well, my brother and this other bodyguard, he was smoking cigarettes, like going out of style. But we were just hanging out because they needed to talk in private. And I think it was Vita, my dad, Vancho. I'm sure my dad would gave him some money and so forth. And then we kind of all came in, and that's when he was just a prominent figure, right? I mean, we knew about him.
Right.
I wish I knew more at the time, right? I was 21 years old. And 89. So let's see if I think it was actually, I was engaged to, so I think she was my fiance at the time. Just, I don't know, the presence, knew enough about him where it was like, holy, it's like, you're meeting a pope or something.
Right.
And, but he had, his steel blue eyes. I just remember because they were sunken, his hands, he was older, but he was just a big presence. And he took that finger, right. And it was such an intense stare. Hard to explain, but I think you've probably seen, with the work you do, stuff in people's eyes, right? It's something about it. You can see that there's a lot in there. And so he looked directly, he goes, he's speaking in the language, and my dad was there. And, the interpretation would be basically, remember, you're Bulgarian, and the language that you speak is from Sar Samuel and his soldiers.
Wow.
That's, more or less who you are.
Sure.
And so, he kind of was looking at me and then would turn to Johnny, but it wasn't like a safe distance. He was in the space.
Right.
It made you like very, uncomfortable, I guess, which is, I'm sure for him, it was normal stuff. But so then my dad says, hey, come on, he wants you to come sit down at the table, the kitchen table. And so that's when I think the bodyguard, the other gentleman, they pulled out an old, Bible. And I believe it was in Cyrillic, so it wasn't English, an English
Sure.
Bible. And then there was it looked like it was a non-working firearm. I knew enough back then of firearm, but it was like the old pistol revolver.
Sure.
Probably didn't even, I don't think it worked, had a lot of rust and stuff on it. And then a dagger, or, a knife. And so he proceeded to say the oath, Imro oath, and we repeated it like he did, and then my dad repeated it, so it may not have been exactly word for word but either way, we knew what we were listening to, and we swore. And so, at the end, he's like, don't ever betray the ideals of Imro or the MPO, and they were in his mind interchangeable. I think, he understood, obviously, we're an American, but so we, walked out of there. Like, I don't think we really knew the significance, Kirill. Like, even to this day, we've always been quiet about it. It's kind of like it was, the more older we got, the more we realized how significant that was. And, really, I first told that story when I went back to Bulgaria. And I, kind of was off the cuff. I had prepared my, speech, and this was at one of the human rights violations that was sponsored by the President Radef in Bulgaria. So I had an opportunity to speak, and it just came out.
Right.
Very passionate. I think just proud of my family, proud of who our people are. I think we go all the way back. I don't think our people ever left and migrated outside of the Balkans. We should talk another point in the conversation on the Slav invasion, because I'm not convinced that occurred.
Okay.
But I need to talk. We should talk about that. But anyway, so with Vancho, that was it. That was the experience, and I think that was the last time my dad saw him as well. Our first time and last, because then he passed. Sometime would have been a year later, less than a year. He seemed in like decent health as far as he very clear mind. But my dad's still alive at 95, and he kind of can get around. But Ivan his mind was sharp. My dad was just is his hero.
Sure.
And so.
And I guess for those who are kind of listening to the story and maybe don't fully understand the significance of the Bible, the revolver, the dagger. I mean, in so many words, I mean, you were initiated into the organization, into the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization at that point. That's the purpose of that ritual, correct?
Correct. The extent, I'm not sure what, because as you said, Imro kind of was, look, it was still there, right? As you know, was it at its greatness and power that it had? But I believe he still had a tremendous influence, right, back in Bulgaria. And I think there was still a lot of fear for his actions, right? Because he still had agents out there. And I think, over time, right, everybody starts to die off in the passion and cause and loyalty, and it's not there anymore.
Right.
So just like anything. And so yeah, I think it's obviously we're blessed that we got to meet him. And he, there was a warmth to him, because when we left, we kissed on the cheek as we normally do.
Right.
And I don't remember if it was, I want to say it was twice, like on each side of the cheek. But he held my head, and then he did the same thing to Johnny. Remember, again, he did that same thing with, you're Bulgarian, and you're from, you speak the language of Sar Samuel,
right.
And that is who you are, right? And he's talking in his Bulgarian intensely. Yeah. And I think me and with Johnny, we look at each other like afterwards we're leaving, and it's like, what just happened? Because you don't know exactly what was said.
Were you expecting that when you first met him, or no?
No, we were kind of more like, hey, to make sure Dad's good, right? Because people, we had to be careful, because nobody really knew at that time where he lived, and so it was, I don't remember how we got there, if there were two cars or not. I need to talk to Vlado, because I don't remember if Vlado Parif was with us. He may have been, and maybe that was the other person that was outside, right? But for some reason, I don't think he was there. So anyways, that's kind of the story.
Well, I have to ask you, because I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's a bit of an elephant in the room, I guess, because currently, I mean, you said that your father viewed Ivan Mikhailov, Vancho Mikhailov, as his hero. If you listen to the rhetoric, I guess, out of the modern Republic of North Macedonia, a lot of Macedonians, they view him as a controversial figure, to say the least. A lot of them view him as like a villain. The term, fascist collaborator, gets thrown around a lot. The opening of a Bulgarian club in the city of Bitola bearing his name caused a lot of controversy. There was even an attempt, I guess, to burn it down by some of the Macedonians. So, I mean, from a family that kind of views Ivan Mikhailov, the IMRO, the MPO, in a very positive light, I mean, how do you view a lot of the rhetoric that views him the opposite way, as a villain? I mean, how do you interpret that?
Look, I guess I'm pretty forgiving person in general. I mean, you can look at our rhetoric here in the U.S. and just, how can you go from one dichotomy of left to the right?
Sure.
And it's kind of no different there. It's really, what education and information and people are you around to influence your thinking? And I think as time goes on, history does seem to become clear, right? As we farther we go from present day or in the past. And I think that yeah, sure, there were many people assassinated, but they were traitors. And what he was trying to do was really trying to get a autonomous country for the people of Macedonia, and anybody that was against that, it's over. Now, if you think about World War II, and I'm not sure if it was Ivancho or someone else in the organization, I thought went to Vienna and met with the Nazi party, because they were, IMRO was very influential, right, as you're aware, right, within those regions. And so they could get a lot done, but at the end of the day, I think that somewhat was a means to an end,
right?
But it I mean, look, I have a lot of Bulgarian friends and a lot of friends from Macedonia, and look, we can all claim anything you want, but hey, if you grew up and it happened to be that you're in a communist country doesn't necessarily make you communist, but you're part of it.
Sure.
And the Yugoslavia thing is horror, just everything that people went through. And there's an old saying, I think, hey, either my great grandfather was Bulgarian, my grandfather was Yugoslavian, and I'm Macedonian, right? So and I can't remember where I heard that. I don't know if we heard that from a taxi driver in Skopje when we were over there. Look, if people can say what they want, but there's a lot of people that aren't saying that. And I've communicated with the Bitola group, and I try to be supportive as I can. I think there's things that Vita and others there criticize me or my dad and Ivan, and it's okay. I have it. It's out there. I said, whatever you do to me, it's okay. I still love you, right? As a people, everybody has their perspective. But if you start to attack my dad, he can't defend himself. There was an individual in Australia that did that. And look, it's not right. Let's forget about it. Let's not you don't have to get along, but let's like Rodney King, but we need to respect each other.
Sure.
This is going to go nowhere other than we'll continue to fight. And unfortunately, there are influences, just like there are in the United States, to keep people fighting.
Right.
Right. Because if you get everybody's focused on this, we got something over here that nobody's focusing on.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing there. I think we got some, very, wealthy individuals, right, that want to stay in power. How do you keep people in power? You keep people separated and fighting.
Right.
And so anyways, look, they say what they want, right? People are saying,
and I mean the stuff about him, I mean, kind of specifically I guess trying to tarnish his legacy, his memory. I mean, I challenge anyone to show me any specific piece of writing from Vancho that is quote unquote fascistic. I haven't come across any that would suggest he supported any type of ideology along those lines. At the end of the day, his entire life was spent fighting for an independent and united Macedonia. And a lot of the people who are attacking him claim to be fighting for the exact same thing. So I think, me personally, I think the 50 years of communist rule, which was certainly opposed to him and what he was in favor of, kind of tarnished his image, and probably has a lot to do with the way people view him and kind of the lens that he's viewed through. But I think, like you said, as more time passes, as that discourse kind of becomes more free, obviously certainly more than it was in Yugoslavia, I think his image will kind of change, and reality will reflect who he really was as a person as time goes on.
Yeah, I have this. I'll just move here. I got
sure.
I have this book got converted, but I'm not sure how you can really. Let's make sure I can. Let me make sure I'm seeing this correctly.
Yes, I can. Switzerland, the Balkans. Yes.
Yeah. So and on the side, this way. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
On Mihailov.
Yep.
So this was converted, and I've read it many times, and it's, how can you really be a fascist when you are looking for a free and independent Macedonia, a Switzerland of the Balkans? How is that? How can that be?
And I read on my channel, I have a video where I read an extensive passage from that book. And I mean, it's clear that he supports a Macedonia for all the ethnic groups there. I mean, if he was a fascist, he would be, trying to exclude certain people or, do things along those lines. But it's clear. I mean, he recognizes there's a place for different ethnic groups to live there: Greeks, Albanians, Bulgarians, Turks. I mean, it's pretty open to all the different populations that live there. So like you said, I mean, it's hard to read that and then conclude that he's a fascist afterwards. I mean,
look, exactly. And at this time, right, the Macedonian identity, right, when you have to look now, as I told President Radev, I said, and this was just my commentary to the group there. The only way you're going to tell somebody or force them to change is by gunpoint or by a knife to the throat or to a family member. So that'll never happen. So at the end, we have to accept that part of that ethnicity, right, is a new ethnicity or a national identity, Macedonian.
Right.
But that doesn't help. The Vardar can't own all that, right? Because they're still Macedonians from Aegean and Piedon, but they got Bulgaria. And so it needs to be more inclusive. And the MPO truly is the only organization in the world that is inclusive to any ethnicity.
Right.
So we do have individuals that align or more they're Macedonians. They're not Bulgarian.
Yeah.
And so if you want to come in and be an Albanian and be in our organization, we welcome it because it's for all people of Macedonia.
Right.
And so, the other organizations out there are not. It's only about that identity. And I think that's wrong, right? It needs to be inclusive because that's how we're going to move forward, right? As a group. But
yeah,
yeah,
and it seems like you said, I mean, in a way, there's an attempt, I guess, to monopolize the term Macedonian and kind of exclude any other historical interpretation of what that meant to various people throughout different periods of time. And it just seems like, this kind of narrow or even newer understanding of what it means to be a Macedonian is used to kind of deny the other aspects of what it means to be a Macedonian, other people who view their Macedonian identity through maybe a different lens. So I agree that at least the MPO, as far as I know, has always been kind of open to any nationality or any ethnic group as long as you're from the region of Macedonia.
Right. And I'm sure, like I was talking to some of the old timers, not really old timers, Nick Stefanoff, who was on the Central Committee. And, I'm like, Nick, I wonder what everybody would argue about at some of the, MPO conventions. But you think about all the history that's there from World War I to Yugoslav, to Vancho. There's probably plenty of things to argue through. I remember a time that my uncle, who was from the Piedon part of Bulgaria, Uncle George Spahiv, put his fist through the table at a convention, the long table, and just, I mean, the church at the time, I think they had that table just to keep it, right? And we would always look at it and we're like, how did somebody, we're little kids, how did somebody put their fist through there? He was like a bull, and loved him. He was shot and killed by a burglar, and he worked he ran one of the liquor stores that my dad owned.
Yes.
And
I actually read about that. It's in your dad's autobiography, I think.
Yeah, it's a horrible thing. My cousin Greg, and he's a real estate agent in Fort Wayne, one of the top ones. But anyway, so a lot of back to Vancho. I just think it's convenient to throw. There are undertones of keeping people fighting and keeping people in power. That's it. And history, if you grew up watching, I can't remember what show, I think you had the gentleman on, it was Vardar Slav, I think.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he had a segment on the type of TV shows that were on, back years ago, and the propaganda that they were pushing.
Yeah.
When you're growing up with that, you can't blame the person. You just hope that people seek to understand and learn from multiple sources, and just try to be balanced at what the conclusion is.
Right. And like you said, I mean, people who grew up in Yugoslavia, I mean, there's no way you can blame them if they're, information is limited to one narrative. I think stuff that concerns me is, you've had 30 years of, post-communist, a post-communist environment in which people, have the ability to kind of learn new information. There seems to be a bit of a stubbornness, to not seek out new information. I think, if anything, that's kind of what is a little bit, troublesome or concerning, is the kind of desire to remain in a Yugoslav prison when Yugoslavia is not around anymore.
Yeah, it's I've done a lot of DNA and the big Y, all these things, and I'm part of this group where he sent me a coffee cup because I've donated to help him. So whatever this J, it's a line that goes back.
Sure,
but
sure.
He basically said, 5,300. Your ancestors never left, and also they were never. No one ever came outside in, because everything is tied to being in the Balkans, and so they're doing a lot. They need more data.
Sure.
And I think what's going to happen is, not even going down the path of, hey, we're Alexander the Great, we're bottom line is, we most likely, most of the people that are in our region of Macedonia are ancient people, period. And anybody can put any coin on it at that point. It depends what border was there and what map you're looking at. But I do believe that that's where it's hard for me to understand if the Slavs came down, because you would expect that if they came down, then we would have more northern type, maybe characteristics in the DNA. Maybe that'll show up. They just don't have enough data points, right? So it's kind of a side note on that one.
All right. So now that we got some of the historical stuff out of the way, let's talk about kind of more the present day MPO, your involvement with that organization. I'm assuming you are a member of the MPO currently.
I am, and I was just I voted in or pulled into the central committee as the treasurer. So perfect. I am kind of transitioning and working through that. But that, I'm actually kind of in my father's footsteps, because he was the treasurer back in the day.
Okay. And are you part of a certain chapter? I know they have members at large or stuff like that. Are you part of a specific chapter of the MPO?
Yeah, I'm part of the Chicago chapter, Piedon chapter.
Okay.
And great group of individuals passionate about the MPO, the history of the MPO, and also doing the right things to move forward, right, to build the MPO, more chapters and more people. They grew that chapter from under 10 to over 50 people, and I wouldn't be surprised in the next year we wouldn't be over 100, or it's a different chapter in that area. Sure. But we have other chapters that are going to be opening up, that has to go through the process,
right?
But so I think we're in a different place, I feel, and the recent central committee, they've done a great job in keeping things together through COVID. It was pretty challenging, and so we have real estate and rental income and all, and great things to keep money flowing.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the Chicago chapter, Piedon, has kind of been leading the charge. It's kind of been the vanguard, if you will, of the organization recently. As you mentioned, kind of the growth of that chapter and everything. I guess,
in Canada, one thing about the Canadian chapters and the individuals, right, that have been up there, the Bulgarians that are up there, they have been consistently passionate, sure, through the churches. Larry Korloff, and he's been dedicated to the cause. There's others out there that, Phil Nichols and others that are there. But, everybody has different things that have happened. We lost a lot of chapters,
right,
for a number of different reasons that I'll probably never even understand.
Mhm.
But we'll never get them back. I think they've either moved on, closed down. But I feel that we have a lot of momentum. Svetoslav Stankoff, the general counselor in Chicago, has been
Right.
instrumental in really helping me personally get more exposed into, I guess, the Bulgarian government, which I think will be useful, and also people and news and the media to really get this organization to the height that it needs to be, and it
Right.
was.
Now you mentioned, obviously Svetoslav Stankov, the general counsel in Chicago for Bulgaria, and you mentioned the Bulgarian government. Has there been any assistance from the Macedonian government, the government of North Macedonia? Obviously, that's with the different narratives, you could say historically, there's one can clearly see why they might be a little bit more hesitant to get involved with the MPO. But has there been any communication, as far as you're aware, with that government?
No, I think there's been some communication with the UMD, the United Macedonian Diaspora here in the U.S. But look, I feel like there's not a hatred, but there's such a chasm, right,
Right.
between um, the national identity and the Vardar Macedonians, right, and the
Right.
North Macedonian and the Americans that are here now. Um, it's difficult. I think it's unfortunate we have two organizations.
Sure.
I welcome, right, meeting with anyone in Macedonia. I look forward to. I really would like to get to Ohrid, Skopje, Bitala, and meet the group, the Ivan Mihailov group there that I've corresponded with. Very passionate, right? And they're going through a lot of complications, as you can imagine.
Sure.
But then also maybe go into Sofia and then get over into Brussels for the EU. So
Right.
I think there needs to be just more awareness of everything that's going on. I think that there's we need to do a better job, one, of educating the DC politicians, right? So
Sure.
that's one goal, that I have, that passionate about, that we need to be prevalent within the political aspects of certain states in the United States as well as Washington, and then also helping, understanding on the EU side, and the politicians there, especially with everything that's going on between the Macedonia trying to get into the EU, and there's different fascist people that are probably against it, right, within the Republic of
Oh
Macedonia,
yeah.
just right. So I think that's kind of the first goal, and then part of that really is to raise funds, right? And raising funds is something that I would say my dad and some others have done very well over the years, and so I need to step into some big footsteps here in order to be able to do that. And the more that we get into the education and aspects of our history, arts, our food, our culture, it's important that we want to retain that, right? And make sure that it's historically correct.
Right.
And we're not being drowned out by, a important country, right? But it can't be monopolized.
Right.
And that, I feel, is just disrespectful to anyone's family that has fought or died or was persecuted over the last 500 years, right, by the Turks, the Greeks, the Serbs. It's just a slap in the face, right? And
Yep.
we are the same people in the end. And so to have this hatred for no reason, name calling, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
just don't need it, right? I feel like it's artificially created. It was, right, as you pointed out, through Yugoslavia. It's very easy if these are the books that you have to read, and Bulgaria's second class citizen in Macedonia, and hey, today, look, we're afraid to say anything that isn't politically correct. Otherwise, you get attacked, right? Depending on where you're at on the spectrum of the political side, left or right, and
Sure.
it's seems like one side's attacking more than the other. And
Yeah,
I feel that that's kind of similar between the Republic of North Macedonia and the rest of the world. And so it's funny when oh, I don't buy, I'm not going to buy that at it's from Bulgaria, right?
Sure.
Or that's Greek. What are you talking about? The Turkish coffee. Like, I still make it here in the Karif, and
Right.
and we always grew up calling it Turkish coffee. But hey, when you're in Greece, you call it Greek. When Macedonia, it's Macedonian coffee, right?
Yeah. To me, it's Turkish coffee, but I know everyone has their.
But it's Turkish. So
right. No, I agree. I mean, obviously, it's important to kind of preserve the community, the culture, like you said, the language, food, and everything, and discuss the history like I do on my channel, like other people do. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you're gonna have any real world changes, reforms, there has to be a political element to what we're doing as well. And I think lobbying, for lack of a better term, in Washington and Brussels certainly is needed. Certainly, the other organization you mentioned, the UMD, the United Macedonian Diaspora, is not shy about doing the same thing in Washington. I feel that, and this is no insult to the MPO. I think it's just a reflection of where we're at. Is that organization has been lacking and has fallen behind a bit on that realm. I mean, historically, the MPO has been very active in Washington and in American politics, but let's say in the post-Yugoslav period, with the new wave of immigration from Macedonia, people who have a more of an ethnic Macedonian sense as opposed to an older kind of Macedonian-Bulgarian sense of their identity, have kind of, let's say, been more dominant in that sphere in American political life. And I think that's, one aspect where the MPO needs to kind of maybe catch up on. And again, I'm not a member of the MPO. Maybe that'll change one day. I'm just currently not. There's no chapter where I live, so it's not something I'm directly involved in. But I think that's definitely something the MPO can do from an outsider point of view, is get more involved back in that political process here in the United States, and have maybe compete with the UMD on a more direct level. And as things go on, like you said, I mean, ideally you'd have one organization. If one day the animosity and kind of the hatred kind of dissipated, I mean, it's not unforeseeable that might happen at one point if we can kind of reach some sort of common ground. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but ideally, I think that'd be the way to go.
Yeah, I think I mean, we're obviously a not-for-profit, so lobbying, we can't do, and we don't do. But there can be, another entity created, just like the UMD has done, and they're doing a great job. I mean, what they should be doing, and they're obviously very proud of it. They have a lot of passionate people, and for culture and just the identity and everything else. And so, but
I just think there's a certain strain of what's called Bulgarophobia that is still very prominent in that organization and among its members, that as we're sitting here right now, there's too big of a gulf to bridge. But who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I think that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, they view us as too pro-Bulgarian. We view them as too exclusively ethnic Macedonian, without giving enough weight to the historical legacy of some of the Bulgarian elements. So, like I said, I mean, who knows how things proceed in the future? But I think that's kind of the biggest gap as it sits right now.
Yeah, it's one thing to kind of, like, to me, arguing. It's I think as an individual, you're going to be the one that has to decide um, who you are, right? And if you're open to reading and looking at deeper into the history, you're going to find out that your roots are Bulgarians, right? But that doesn't mean you have to, submit or change that if you want to
Right.
keep that identity. I don't, nature and history is going to take care of itself. And so the only thing you do is shut people down by, calling them names. I mean, I see it all on the internet warriors
Right.
and
Right.
book, and I mean, just the things that are going back and forth between your Bulgarian and just your skin color and all. I mean, just all these things. I mean, I got blue eyes, light skin.
All right.
Okay, so anyways, it's going to take time, but I do think getting getting exposed more to this, eventually getting some common ground. I look, the last thing we would need is, if anybody decided, and, got Russia going all over with Ukraine and I was in Bulgaria when a lot of the early things were going on. And it's just amazing to me that, you still have the communist sentiment there, and you
Sure.
have majority really that are supporting Ukraine. But at the end, you got to take care of yourself and focus on Bulgaria and or Macedonia, and not fighting amongst yourselves. It's just, I think we just got a few politicians and groups in place that just, it's all about power. And we're going to continue to manipulate the people and push an agenda that suits us, period. And the MPO is independent. I mean, if we're getting funds, it doesn't matter where we're at. We're still going to be an inclusive organization that's going to allow anybody in it, and we are going to lead to our tune, not to anybody else's. I can't really say the same thing for the UMD, right? Because the UMD is receiving money from Skopje, and
Right.
it's an arm, just like we were arm of IMRO, they're an arm of the Skopjean government, right? It's not really about the people per se. Now, yeah, you got hard workers and everything, but in the end, the direction of that UMD, they're doing great things to, in DC, right? I think in Michigan, was in Michigan or Ohio, they passed the September.
Oh, it's Michigan. Michigan, yeah.
And so, my brother's heavily involved in Indiana politics, and we have Illinois. So look, it takes time, but we also need funds. One of the things we're looking into right now, just as an additional thing for the MPO, in the Pinton chapter, and my friend Boyan, that's on the Central Committee, we really want to get the archives, the handwritten notes. Not as much the books. That's kind of, I would say, phase two, because I think a lot of the books that are there in Bulgarian, they're elsewhere in the world, right? They're accessible through universities, maybe not all, but we want the handwritten notes that between the chapters in the mothership, and also the documentation going back and forth to Ivan. And so we're going to find a way to digitize those, but that's where we're going to be raising funds to do that.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in Fort Wayne that's, sitting in a building that's not accessible to the world, and I think that's definitely a big step. I kind of want to go back to something you mentioned about, finding common ground, I guess, between the Bulgarian and the Macedonian side. I think a good first step is maybe even just dropping the labels Macedonian, Bulgarian, just for a moment, and just realizing, if we look at, leaving that stuff aside, because I think you mentioned, at one point, they have to recognize that their grandfathers or their roots are Bulgarian. I would say even before we get to that step or get to that level, I mean, just leave the Macedonian, Bulgarian labels aside. I mean, we have the same for all intents and purposes, I know this is also a contentious thing, but the same language, culture, food, dances, all this kind of cultural stuff. I mean, if you were to ignore the fact that there's an international border there and there's different labels people call themselves, then at the end of the day, there's virtually no difference between the people on this side of the board, on that side of the board. I think that's the first realization that people need to come to is, okay, forget, okay, you're hung up on the Macedonian label, you're hung up on the Bulgarian label. Just drop that for a minute and realize that, at the end of the day, we're still the same on a very basic level. I think that's maybe kind of the first step to some sort of reconciliation or some sort of common ground, is just that very basic understanding of, there's really not much that divides us other than these kind of boxes we put ourselves in.
Yeah, I think the historical, what I feel there's two things, right? That it's hard to bridge that gap when there is hatred, and I believe human right, violations to a degree that are happening to Bulgarians in North Macedonia.
I would agree.
Absolutely wrong.
Right.
And so, that needs to stop, right? And how's that going to stop? It's probably not, right? But it needs to be positioned over time that they need to have rights. And that's where I think the EU, that's part of that whole conversation,
Sure.
right? They're going to get through that. It's really not America's business or anything else, but they need to get through that. If you think about the dancing and the food, and we all have elements, right? We dance in circles, we dance the gaita, we might dance it differently, the music. And so I have a lot of the music from the old timers, like Elo Kalkoff's band. It's great to hear that music. I mean, it just, the new music's obviously different. I've never heard of a pig dance, right? When you get married, I mean, we just have the bread dance, right? But there's slight differences, right, between regions and
even within Macedonia and within Bulgaria, there's differences. I mean,
villages,
right?
The dialects are slightly different a little bit, and
right.
And so I think Bulgarian historical aspects of it, let's say the denouncing of Vancho, and just, I mean, it's made up, right? Yeah. That needs to stop too. But to sit down, could I have a conversation with someone at UMD about life, about our kids, about how much we love our families, how much that we are loyal to each other, how much we're focused on religion, and just trying to always do the right things, but family's always first. And that part, why shouldn't we be able to do that? And
Absolutely.
And it comes up in the point of, well, like when you go to work, I go to work, or even other family members, we're not talking about politics. And yeah, that might come up with like the president, the Congress, the Senate,
Sure.
Right? Those kind of politics. But we're not really talking about, what are you, an Irish person or a German person? It just doesn't even come up, right?
Yeah.
But you're right that there's so much similarities, and we fought so many times. I think there's a line to say, okay, where do those similarities end? But I pretty much the people in Aegean Macedonia, that in our group, right, the three regions of Macedonia, very much the same. We got Turkish words inside our dialect. We have Greek words inside our dialect. How can that not be over 500 years, right? The languages for sure has been, slightly changed.
Sure.
It's a hard thing. I just think doing shows like this, podcasts like this, like you talking to the Bardoslav gentleman, having those conversations, I think, is helpful. I was on, a couple of the other shows.
Yeah, I saw you on Corridor 8.
Corridor 8.
Yeah, I had those guys on here at one point. We discussed in Macedonian, Bulgarian, but yeah, they were on here as well.
So the more we can do those, I think the better. I'm not sure, how I would be received going into, Bitala or, some of these other places, but I'm going to go, right?
Sure.
We were at, at one point, I can't remember, it was my dad's memoir, but when Yugoslavia still was right at the tail end, right? Kind of disintegrating. We brought Bulgarian books from Sofia through the border into Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
We were held at, gunpoint, AKs, literally at the border. They took all the books. Actually, I think he did talk about that in his story, because then he called, Washington and people that he knew, and eventually he got all the books back. But I mean, I was there.
It's sad that you have to go through them, and you have to contact Washington to get some Bulgarian books from Macedonian customs.
Right. I mean, it's nuts. And my dad was pretty hot, at the time, and I was hot. This was the same. It was in that when was it? Would have been, no, not the Vancho trip. It was the trip before that. But it was just, same thing, right? A Greek priest in Aegean Macedonia. We were asking about Bulgaria, this, that, are you Bulgarian, having and it got back to a Greek priest. He's calling the border. We're being stopped at the border. It's just, come on.
Yeah.
Right. And what are people afraid of?
Right.
And so I don't have an answer. I think the thing that we care about in the MPO is we want to maintain, right, the culture, the heritage of who we are for our kids and our grandkids. And there's plenty of money there with the property and the real estate, but we need to get back to this. And I feel like there's a new rebirth, right? There's a lot of interest, especially with what the Hidden group has been doing.
No, I felt that as well. Yeah.
Right. And so I think, but we got to be smart about it and stop the name calling. And I do feel that we haven't been the ones that really do the name calling. I'm never going to say, oh, well, you go over to Greece. The moment you say, hey, I'm from Aegean Macedonia. Oh, you're Greek. No, I'm not Greek. I'm Bulgarian. Right. Conversation ended. Right. And so it's those type of things that are just, nuts. But I feel like we are in a good momentum. We just got to continue to do all the right things and raise money and use it for good causes. Want to get those archives up, regardless of what you find in them. It's historical fact.
Sure.
And if there's something that's embarrassing to the organization or to an individual, most likely they're all dead now. And that's part of history correcting itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to be on the side that's manipulating, falsifying history. If something is what it is, then just let it be, and deal with it and view it in the historical context that it occurred in. Well,
that's right,
Tom. I think it's a great place to end the conversation. I had a great time talking to you, and I think there's certainly enough to come back and have further conversations on. I don't want people to think that I'm avoiding kind of the whole Slavic migration thing. I know you brought that up. I think that's certainly a great topic for a future discussion. Maybe we can kind of discuss maybe some different opinions we have, or similarities we have on that topic. I know I have a reputation for being pretty pro-Slavic on my channel, so clearly that's a difference that came out during our discussion. But
no, I'd love to. Like, I think there's something here too, because you're like, my wife is Greek from Aegean Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
Her roots are Bulgarian, but she's Greek was born there. And she can understand Polish, right? So if we have a lot of the Polish workers over, she probably can understand 50% of what they're saying.
Sure.
So that says something, like,
yeah.
And maybe when I said what I said, I just haven't, I've only read it in books, but I feel like we're going to meet at some point when you start looking at DNA, mm-hmm. and we start looking at more of the genealogy through science. we're going to find out maybe a different historical past, possibly. And so I'd love to learn more, because I think, you know, there's a lot of areas that I'm still weak in, like the Greek Civil War and the partisans. And I think that is fascinating to me, because Bopcher was part of the partisan headquarters, and it was blown up, I believe, by the Brits. So, you know, in the end, it's like, was my grandfather, you know, were they aligned more to the communist, you know, Greek side? So I'm open to talking more about all these things. So
absolutely.
Well,
thank you again for coming on the channel. And you know, best of luck to you in your new position as treasurer of the MPO, and to the Pedian chapter.
And hey, welcome, and we can pull you into the MPO at any point. There's a new chapter coming up here.
I'm sure if you twist my arm hard enough, it'll happen. So
no, thank you. You're doing a great thing here. We
I
need to
appreciate
do more of these things, and I really feel, you know, having a balance in conversation. There's nothing heated here, right?
No, not at all. Yeah. There's no reason to have it heated. I mean, even if we're having someone from the UMD, I mean, I'm always open to a civilized conversation with anyone. So
to do that sometime, maybe you have someone from the UMD, and I'd be happy to join.
Sure. No, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right. Well, Tom, you have a good day and a good weekend, and I'm sure we'll be speaking in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you, Carol. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.